broken. Warrior for justice, truth unfiltered. Some people call him the bow tie killer. It's time for Fletcher Long. Every story has two sides, a little right, a little wrong. Let freedom ring through your radio. Come on, let's start the show. One thing I know for certain, the truth is in the long version. The truth is in the long version.
You're getting the long version, and today we're going to have a very special guest as soon as he calls in. We're going to have a guy named Alex Schadenberg, and Alex is the international chair of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. And they have come out with a documentary that will be on in theaters called The Euthanasia Deception. And this is a hot-button topic in a lot of places. You may remember that John J. Hooker went to the Supreme Court in Tennessee to argue his right to die. People that become terminally afflicted.
And there was a lady in California or Oregon. Remember, she had some kind of brain cancer. And
it's legal in Oregon.
Yeah,
so it's
that's
probably
where
in Oregon,
she lived in California and moved to Oregon, I believe.
So she could do it.
So she could do it.
Well, of course, and Oregon will pay for you to have to commit suicide, but they will not pay for suicide prevention, which is it's kind of like the Hunger Games. You got to call out but the considerations that are general. And I don't know. Alex was supposed to come on Friday, but everybody got this will be here. Everybody got kind of bumped today because of the day that we were down, which is not that big of a deal. But the people that have these dire prognoses that they are going to die and languish in pain, this is an attractive thing for them. So do we have him now? Alex Schadenberg.
This is Fletcher Long, is it not?
It is, and thank you so much for joining the long version. I was kind of explaining that you have a documentary coming out, The Euthanasia Deception. And you're the international chair for the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and you have, of course, Belgium in the documentary was kind of the ground zero for legalized euthanasia or government-assisted suicide. But we have a state in the United States, in Oregon, that allows assisted suicide, and your coalition has been collated to try to dispel some of the myths about doctor-assisted suicide.
That's absolutely correct. Yes, Fletcher. No, the reason we went to Belgium, not that it was the first country, it was in fact the second country to legalize euthanasia, but as bad as it is in the Netherlands, Belgium has let it travel much further. They've let it expand much further, and then you see just on the weekend the announcement of the first under 18-year-old who has died by euthanasia in Belgium under the official numbers, right? Because there are euthanasia deaths that are not reported.
Yeah.
We can get into that in the interview later. But, I mean, you see in Belgium that's just gone wild and crazy, not to say that it hasn't in the Netherlands.
Well, and Alex, we had a very well-known figure in Tennessee named John J. Hooker, who is passed now, but he wanted to be euthanized, and he went before the Tennessee Supreme Court in a right-to-die case and argued it himself. He was one of the great constitutional lawyers in the history of the bar of Tennessee. But what do you say to those people who relate that they have nothing but a painful, terrible prognosis that they would like to be spared?
Well, the difficulty here is that we're not talking about being spared from a difficult prognosis per se, because what the law actually means, we have to get down to what this is actually about. What you do when you allow assisted suicide and euthanasia is you're giving doctors then the right in law to be able to be directly involved, or in the case of euthanasia, directly kill their patients.
Right.
So in the case of Oregon or Washington State, where it's legal in the U.S., what's happening is that the doctor is the one who decides. So we like to look at the situation and say, it's all about my body, my choice. Well, actually, no. It's the doctor who's now become complicit in the act. It's not, and the people say, oh, well, isn't it the same as suicide? Well, first of all, suicide is always a tragedy. So let's not start building this up and say, oh, This is the same as suicide. I have my right to suicide. We don't have a right to suicide. It's not about that. It's about also those somebody else now is involved, and the law gives somebody else the right in law to be involved with taking someone's life. You cannot control this, and you cannot keep this under, how would you say, in a tight way. And at the same time, somebody who's suffering doesn't need death by lethal injection. Somebody who's suffering needs a caring society that actually works to make sure they are kept comfortable. They die a natural death by being kept comfortable, and that no one's complicit in taking another person's life.
Right.
Let's not be innocent about all this also. When you give somebody else the right in law to cause your death, is it not going to be abused at some time? So people say, oh, well, this is all about my choice. Well, when you go to the euthanasia deception and you hear the story of what happened to Tom Mortier's mother, who was depressed. She was depressed. She was not physically ill. She did not have any terminal diseases in any way. She was not physically suffering. She was depressed. She was depressed deeply after a relationship breakup. Her husband had committed suicide. She was now in a long-term relationship with a man, and he broke off that relationship, and she became so deeply depressed she wanted to die. Now, excuse me, is that about my body, my choice, my autonomy, when someone's so depressed and the doctor decides, yes, I will lethally inject you? That's not. And what about the case of Hank Reitzma's grandfather? The doctor simply said to Henrik Reitzma's grandmother, do you want your husband to be kept comfortable? She said, well, of course I do. I want him to be kept comfortable.
Yeah.
She did not realize that was code language for, is it okay to take the life of your husband?
Yeah,
She didn't know. She had no idea. They didn't figure it out till it was like too late. Now he's on his final hours, and we figured, oh, they're killing him.
Yeah, and one thing that people, and this is going to be kind of a theological moment brought to you by Meeks and Meeks attorneys, but one thing that people don't understand is that doctors are not they're not infallible, which means that doctors sometimes may miss a diagnosis, and maybe the patient's prognosis is not as bleak as what they've been told, and it might just be a situation where, but really, if you're taking the decision out of the ultimate reality, whatever you happen to worship, if you're taking the decision out of the ultimate reality, you're kind of playing God yourself, which is not something that society needs to get into, because we are woefully deficient when it comes to being God-like.
Well, the fact of whether someone worships or believes in God or doesn't believe in God, giving somebody else the right in law to kill you is not a good idea. It's never a safe idea, and I don't feel safe by it either. Remember, we're all in society together. It doesn't matter what you believe or what you don't believe. We're all in society together, and I need to be safe in society. But I'll give you an example. You just mentioned doctors can be wrong, and this is a prime example. The New Zealand Medical Association just reaffirmed their opposition to euthanasia and assisted suicide, because this is being discussed in New Zealand too.
Yeah.
And they got it exactly correct. What they said is, the scope for error is too large when weighed against the outcome. There's an irreversible decision in which the consequences are final, meaning if you die by euthanasia, we did it, and it was an error, we cannot bring you back from death.
Right.
And then they said 10 to 15% of diagnoses are incorrect, and 3% of diagnoses of cancer are incorrect.
Yeah, and you just made my capital punishment argument. This is exactly why I'm anti-capital punishment, because, anything like judging that someone has committed an offense worthy of the ultimate punishment is open for human error. And when you've killed somebody that may not have committed the offense for which they were convicted, now that's just the government committing homicide. And so, it's kind of the same thing here, is that if you're killing somebody that has this dire prognosis, well, you've got 3% of the people that are diagnosed with cancer, the diagnosis was actually a misdiagnosis.
Absolutely. That's exactly. And let's look at it further. I look at the case also of my own father-in-law, stepfather, actually, my mom's husband after my father had died. Anyway, he had brain cancer. No one, of course, wants brain cancer. There's nothing pleasant, of course. There's nothing nice or anything. You can't say, he was okay. The point is that this is what he had, and he was given 6 months to live, and he lived 2 years and 5 months. Now, you would say 2 years and 5 months. He didn't suffer in that time. He was well cared for. My mother was was very good to him, but on top of it, the doctors made sure he was not suffering from pain. He was not suffering at all. He lived right to the end. Near the very end, he slept for several days before he died, and that was that. Now, that is a good death, but on top of it, no one had to kill him. But even worse, when he was given his diagnosis of 6 months, someone would say, well, what kind of life will that be? He's got 6 months to live only anyway. But in fact, he lived 2 years and 5 months. So, really, who's playing God here, who's not playing God? What is this all about? We have to keep in law, no matter what the situation is, the right not to be killed. We have to also have in law a situation where no one has the right to kill me.
Right.
By someone else having the right to kill me, everything becomes wide open. So I had an interview early this morning already about the first, they called it child euthanasia in Belgium, but the person was 17, so I guess they were just a non-adult, right?
They were a tweener? Kind of a tweener?
My response was very clear. If you're going to allow killing, which what they do allow in Belgium, then why are you surprised that they're not going to kill a 17-year-old? What's now different about that?
Right.
Once you allow it, it'll be for anyone.
And if anyone that's listening to this program is curious about some of Alex's pronunciations, like about, you are Canadian.
Well, whether I like it or not, I'm Canadian. You're going to have to forgive me for that.
All right, you're calling us from Ontario, Canada today, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Well,
London, Ontario.
Well, we really do appreciate your joining us because this is becoming a more prevalent issue. Now, if you've ever read the book All Quiet on the Western Front, or even the book A Separate Peace, we in America have a tendency to disregard anything that doesn't happen within the borders of America. However, the problem with legalized doctor-assisted euthanasia is that it is happening in Oregon. It is spreading to the United States, so that's generally when we Americans think it becomes our problem, is when it starts affecting us, even though it's a problem well before it starts affecting you. Of course, everybody knows about Dr. Kevorkian. He was a doctor that was famous for assisting, in theory, the terminally ill in their own lives. He was called Dr. Death. I think he was eventually convicted of a crime and imprisoned for it. But what's going on in Oregon today? Explain to the listeners. They've made that. I mean, it's the complaint is that in Oregon the government will help you kill yourself, but they won't do anything about suicide prevention. They won't spend any money on that.
Well, right now in Oregon, you've actually hit the nail on the head. What's going on is that adults who are going through, depression or to issues related to that might lead to them committing suicide, they have no suicide prevention strategy money investment into that area at this moment, yet they are involved in assisted suicide in a massive way. Last year alone, there was a 26% increase in the assisted suicide deaths, and so what we're seeing is the constant increase. But I think you have to understand further to that, it's not only the assisted suicide deaths is increasing, it's the reasons for assisted suicide that have increased. So in the very beginning, it was mainly people who had cancer, and people would say, oh, well, they have cancer, they're suffering, etc. Really, that's not such a bad situation. But in fact, we've seen the numbers of other cases, other illnesses increase every year now for the last few years. So now you have quite a few other conditions, including diabetes. In 2015, there was 14 people who died from a category called other illnesses, which included diabetes. And these other illnesses are not always what you call terminal illnesses. So what they're saying is it's expanded, and really we have to then question really what is happening in Oregon. But I'll go one step further and explain to you actually how the law works, because that's probably the most important thing your listeners need to know. Because a lot of them are saying, oh, well, Mr. Schadenberg's talking about our freedoms in Oregon. Well, let's think about this. How the law works is someone might request it, that's correct. But the doctor has to say, I think you qualify for assisted suicide. That's the first thing. The doctor has to decide. A second doctor doesn't actually have to examine you at all. They say, oh, Alex, we have a safeguard. Two doctors must decide. No, the second doctor doesn't have to examine you at all. The second doctor only has to look at the medical file and say, oh, this was a reasonable decision. It's all based on reasonableness, right?
Right.
Reasonable decision. And then what happens is then they prescribe the lethal dose and you go home with the lethal dose, there's no further oversight. No further oversight. So people have their lethal dose sitting by their bedside, and it's sitting there. If someone dies by assisted suicide, do we actually know that they voluntarily took it? Do we have any proof whatsoever? And the answer is no. You have no proof whatsoever what actually happened. This is not a clean situation whatsoever. And on top of it, it's not about, they say, oh, it's my body, my choice. Well, wait a second. The doctor decided. We also know that most of the assisted suicide deaths in Oregon are done by Compassion and Choices. They're the political lobby group that promotes assisted suicide. So what you have is a situation is the group that promoted it, who got assisted suicide legalized, are also the group that are running the law. In fact, Compassion and Choices likes to brag that over 90% of the assisted suicides in Oregon are done by them. So what happens is you contact Compassion Choices, they send you to their doctor, they get the second opinion by their doctor, and you die by assisted suicide. So, and then the final thing is how they report it. They say, oh, but Alex, it's all being reported, it's all being covered. First of all, there's quite a few deaths that are not being reported. We see in the data that there was 5 unknown deaths last year alone, 43 people we don't have proper reports from last year alone. That's a significant number. But on top of it, how is the reporting done? It's the doctor who approved the death who sends in the report. So it's a self-reporting system. And then they tell me everything's fine and dandy and safe.
Aren't the doctors told in Oregon to record the cause of death as the underlying illness and not the assisted suicide? Isn't that right?
Right. In Oregon, it's the underlying illness. So therefore, if you had cancer or if you had diabetes, that becomes the cause of death, even though what you actually died of was lethal dose.
Right.
And let's not be, a lot of people say, oh, it's an overdose. It's not an overdose. It's an intentional dose to kill you.
Yeah, so it's, and again, we don't know who actually administered the dosage. And, you talk
have no
about...
idea who administered the dosage. There's no way to know.
You talk about eradicating the trust issue, completely eradicating the issue of trust between a physician and patient. Doctors take an oath. It's called the Hippocratic Oath, where they will not administer bad medicine. Now, that's an oversimplified version of that oath, but it's somewhere I will administer to my patient no bad medicine. And it's the oldest oath a doctor takes, and that directly violates that oath when you're administering to a patient a dosage that you know to be lethal.
I have bad news for you. The Hippocratic Oath is not being done anymore. The Hippocratic Oath said that a doctor would do no harm, but it also said that a doctor would not prescribe any drug that would be able to basically kill the doctor's patient. Now, the whole point of the Hippocratic Oath was not to protect doctors. It was to protect the doctor's patients. Hippocrates knew that the medications they had, even though they were very rudimentary 2,500 years ago, so let's make this point again, it's a pre-Christian oath.
Right.
Hippocrates knew that the doctor could be capable of helping someone or capable of killing someone. And Hippocrates decided that at his time, doctors were involved with both killing and helping, and he decided that that was not possible in a trust model. Therefore, in order to protect the patients, you need doctors to say, I will not kill. And so it was all about the patient. It had nothing to do with the doctor. The doctor is making an oath to protect his or her patients.
Yeah, to protect life. That's right. We got to go to we got to go to break. I'm sorry. We'll be back with Alex Schadenberg and the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition after these messages. A lot of real estate is bought and sold in Clarksville, and all of it has to be inspected, and it has to be done right. It's your largest investment of your life. Do you want to leave its inspection to someone who isn't the best? Of course not. 931-980-5759 gets you the best inspection services. Call Bud Wink at 931-980-5759 to get the home you are buying or selling inspected by the best inspection services. That's 931-980-5759. The best inspection services, changing the quality of home inspections one house at a time.
WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
Keller Williams affiliate broker Jackie Harker knows a family's most valuable asset, whether buying or selling, is the home. Jackie Harker with Keller Williams Realty in Clarksville, Tennessee, would tell you her most important investment is in you. Whether buying or selling a mansion or a starter, the smart money is placed with Harker. Keller Williams' Jackie Harker will work tirelessly to make sure your buying or selling experience will be pleasant and your expectations will be exceeded. Call Keller Williams' Jackie Harker at 931-801-3946 today for all your home buying or selling needs. That's 931-801-3946. And remember, whether buying or selling a mansion or a starter, the smart money is placed with Harker. 931-801-3946. Jackie Harker. Call her today.
If you want to know what's going on in Clarksville, listen to WJZM Radio and worldwide at WJZM.com. WJZM is Clarksville's most dependable radio station for local news and current events.
Many people simply believe they will never get in trouble with the law or need a lawyer, whether it's the sobering event beginning with blue lights in the rear view and ending with an arrest for DUI, being charged with a crime, or some unfortunate episode has occurred. The law office of Lynn Morton realizes you may not have planned on needing an attorney. Going to court without a professional qualified lawyer will result in disastrous consequences or an outcome in your case that causes havoc in your life for years. You need representation by a lawyer who not only has specialized knowledge, but who truly understands the anxiety, confusion, and devastation faced by someone facing criminal accusations or dealing with an array of other legal problems. Having an experienced, committed advocate like Lynn Morton on your side can make all the difference in your case. With support and guidance, you will have the ability to face your legal situation with confidence that can only come from knowing your case is in capable, dependable hands. Lynn Morton is dedicated to safeguarding her clients' rights and providing them with the attention and consideration their case and future deserve. For these most bitter moments, Lynn Morton can step forward to lend a helping hand and guide you through every aspect. Call Lynn Morton in your most trying time of need. 931-906-0000.
Since 1941, serving the public interest. WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
You be in the skies. Well, that's what you are. A lemonade pass.
The documentary is called The Euthanasia Deception, and we have the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition International Chair, Alex Schadenberg from Ontario, on the line with us. And Alex, I was just thinking off air when we went to break, and welcome to the long version, by the by, but I was just thinking as we went to break that, you know, there's so many ways that nefarious interest can get involved in this decision. You know, everybody knows, and it's just a fact that the insurance industry runs medicine now. You have insurance adjusters that will tell doctors that you can or cannot administer a particular type of, in America anyway, I know in Canada it may be different, but in America the insurance industry runs medicine, and they're telling doctors all the time, you can't perform this procedure because we're not going to pay for it. You can do this one, you can't do this one. And it's easy to see that if doctors have the right to assist in a patient's suicide, what's going to keep the insurance company from just saying, you know what, we don't want to pay for this chemotherapy, and we don't want to pay for this all this other stuff. Why don't you, doctor? Why don't you talk them into just, you know, taking the old needle? I mean, it's pretty easy to see that could happen.
Oregon already, exactly what you're talking about. You had several cases of people who had cancer and who were diagnosed with aggressive forms of treatment because their cancer was needing an aggressive treatment, and they were told no to medical treatment. They were sent a letter from the Oregon Health Department saying no to medical treatment, but yes to assisted suicide. You know, even it says in the letter, we're not going to provide you medical treatment, but hey, you can have Barbara Wagner was the primary case of that, and she got into the media and everything about what she was saying. She was saying, to not be willing to offer me a chance at life, but you're offering me assisted suicide. Well, that's absolutely wrong, and that was exactly the case that went on in that situation. Now, in Canada, it's actually even worse than that because we have universal health care. Yeah. And it's not about the average doctor either. Let's be brutally honest. The average doctor wants nothing to do with assisted suicide and euthanasia, and the polling shows it. The average doctor did not go into medicine because they wanted to be involved with causing the death of their patients. They recognized from the beginning that they were caregivers, and that when you cannot treat someone, your responsibility then is to properly care for them so that they are not suffering. This argument, you're going to be forcing people to suffer. I have no interest, and I do not want in any way people to be suffering, inordinate pain that cannot be controlled. I've got no interest in that, nor do I want that. The reality is that we have an ability to properly care for people, and that's what we should be doing. We should not be killing them. We should be caring for people. And I'm not talking about, doing all this excessive medical treatment. In fact, what we're talking about is proper caregiving, which actually is not expensive. It's this extraordinary medical treatment that actually does become expensive. So in Canada, where you have universal health care where I'm from, it's actually a little bit worse because the state already determines what is acceptable to be done and what is not acceptable to be done. And there's a lot of pressure on physicians not to do certain things. And obviously, assisted suicide is cheap and treatment is expensive.
Well, and you also have
that's obviously the case, yeah.
You also have a problem. If you follow the money causes a lot of our problems. You also have a problem. Let's say you have some wealthy guy that needs some organs, and you've got someone that has been terminally diagnosed, or maybe they're just depressed, and they pay this person to go in and get a euthanasia dosage because they want to harvest their organs. And, you've got that issue too. Then it becomes even more macabre.
Well, what you have, and it's not in the video itself, the whole issue of the organ donation issue, but in the Netherlands and Belgium, you have what they call euthanasia organ donation. So someone who wants euthanasia and has also agreed to give their organs, they then devise the whole way of doing it so that they can get the healthy organs before the person's actually died. Because as you know, organs are healthiest before you die. After you die, they start becoming, they start losing their vitality. So the best way to do organ donation is obviously to take it from living donors. We know that also from someone because we have 2 kidneys. So if I have a friend who needs a kidney and we're actually a good match, and I give my kidney, my live, healthy kidney out of my body to them, obviously that is going to be a better donation than from a cadaver because there might have been some, the kidney might have been affected a bit by the fact that the body has now died. It starts decaying is what happens.
Right.
What's going on. So the better and that's what you see going on. But what's most important when we look at this question is how does this affect actual people in the very basis of their life? And Mark Pickup gives this interview. It's very important, his interview, because he talks about as a person with a disability, he talks about he has MS. And 30 years ago, he was a healthy, active father. He was, involved with sports. He played guitar. And then his MS came on, and he lost his ability to play sports, to play his guitar, to do all those other things that you enjoy so much in life, the other things in life. He says he became so depressed that if euthanasia or assisted suicide were available at that time, he would very likely have chosen it. And he says, now 30 years later, my life has got joy because my life has changed. I've come to accept who I am, but also it has joy because my whole idea about what my life has, my value of my life has changed. But then he says, but look at me now. If you were a doctor and I came in with cancer into your office and I was down and wanting euthanasia, you would say, well, that's quite reasonable because I'm in my wheelchair. He says, I'm a triplegic. I'm in my wheelchair. If I was asking for euthanasia, people would say, well, that would seem very reasonable with your life because it's discrimination. There's a discrimination that's innate in the culture.
Right.
And then he said, but if I were a healthy person walking into the office, but I had exactly that same condition, and I was very depressed asking for euthanasia or assisted suicide, the average doctor would say, I know you, and I know you're down. Let's first try suicide prevention. Let's first try treatment of depression. Let's first try to care for you.
Yeah.
Of course, there are the euthanasia-minded doctors who would look at you and say, oh, yes, it's your right. Let's sign you up and get it done.
Let's sign you up. Yeah, let me ask you this question. I think we have to be real careful about I don't think we really need to be doing it at all, but in places where they are having doctor-assisted suicides, this thing about allowing people to check out that just happen to be depressed. I mean, there's a lot of times in someone's life, and you may know the statistics for this, I'm sure you do because you're the international chair of this coalition, but how many people in the course of their lifetime contemplate suicide?
Well, first of all, suicide prevention is very important, and it's a very large number of people who go through times in their life where they might consider ending their life, or they've become so depressed that their decisions are very clouded. This is not an uncommon reality. The problem is that the average person would look at that and say, you know, Fletcher, that's not a good idea. I wouldn't be for euthanasia or assisted suicide for those reasons. Like depression, that doesn't seem reasonable.
Right.
But you know, in Belgium and the Netherlands, and also sadly Canada, they allow euthanasia for physical and psychological suffering.
Right. Yeah,
So
that's the point.
Say
Yeah.
you go to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says that your psychological suffering is significant. They consider that equal to physical suffering, and in some ways that would be correct. Once you allow killing, I guess certain types of psychological suffering would be very similar to physical suffering. So once you allow killing, why wouldn't you allow someone who's gone through long-term depression or even deep depression to have lethal injection just because they are not of their right mind? And who's to say they're not of the right mind? See, all these things come up for grabs once you allow killing.
Yeah, you're right. It's once you cross over that line, you tend to go over the line to the extent to where you forget where the line was initially placed. We've got a listener that wants to know, so there are no pancreatic transplants as of now, and you cannot live without the pancreas. But in this case, euthanizing a patient who wants it could save a person who needs a pancreas. Diabetics, pancreatic cancer patients, etc. If they can find a way to actually transplant that organ, obviously they haven't yet, but would euthanasia be beneficial for people who need a pancreas transplant, was the question.
Well, obviously, if they can't do it, we're talking about theory, but the fact is that we don't have to talk about the pancreas. We can talk about heart transplants. Obviously, we know if you read anything about heart transplants, the healthiest heart comes from someone who was healthy and who was young and who was vital. And the best thing to do when you're doing a heart transplant is to have it done to remove the heart right after the person died and put it straight into the body of the person who needs the heart, because you don't want there to be the, the heart having some sort of loss of its vitality. Well, obviously, euthanasia would accomplish that. You would then remove the heart, and that's your form of euthanasia, or you would remove the liver, and that's because obviously you can't live without a heart, you can't live without a liver. And these things are occurring. This is what's happening, and people are saying, well, isn't that wonderful? Well, it's not wonderful, because the very first cases we had of it, right off the bat, you've allowed killing, so that they say, well, what's the difference now? Well, the very first cases we had, there was a woman who was disabled. She had a disability. She was not terminally ill at all. And the response was, well, I can do some good now by allowing organ donation. I can do good by allowing this organ donation. So it becomes then the pressure to help others. I will end my life to help others. It's almost like a little bit like Monty Python. The sad thing is it's not a show, it's real.
Yeah. Well, and in that way, that's almost like self-imposed martyrdom, isn't it?
It would be a form of that. And what happens is there's so much innate negativity towards people with disabilities that sometimes people think that is the best thing they can do for others, as crazy as that might seem.
Well, what got you interested? When did y'all decide that you wanted to make a documentary about this, and tell us somewhat about that process?
Okay, so what's very important about this is that we were going through a debate in Canada, and the media and others were buying into the storyline, which I call the deception. The deception is that this is all about, Mike, is all about compassion and mercy. We're being merciful to people by ending their life. Mercy is killing rather than mercy being caring. Compassion is to kill rather than compassion is to care. Autonomy, this is all about autonomy. This is all about, we can have safeguards. And yet, well, I knew from the data from Belgium and the Netherlands that, in fact, these are not the truths, that, in fact, these are the flags we wave in order to make us comfortable with the concept of killing. So we started the concept of this documentary. What happened is that we decided from early on that we had to go to where it has become the worst in order to get stories so people can understand. You think that it's about this, but once you do this, you're opening the door to that. So please don't open the door. Once you open the door, it's too late. And so we thought we needed to interview people who have direct experience with euthanasia, physicians in Belgium who have been directly, connected to it, people who have had euthanasia in their family, people who've had disabled children and dealing with it. So, for instance, Lionel Rosemont, he has a significantly disabled child, and he says, well, now that the culture's changed in Belgium, my daughter's now 20, but a few years ago we're walking through the park, she's in her wheelchair, and somebody comes up to us and says, why did you not euthanize your daughter? Well, when did that become a question you should even ask somebody? Why did you not kill your daughter? Yes, she has significant disabilities, but what's so wrong about loving and caring for your child with disabilities? What's so wrong about that?
What's wrong with the perception in today's second theological moment that God doesn't make mistakes?
Well, the fact of it is that whether someone has a disability or whether someone's able-bodied, they are equally human.
That's right. It doesn't make them a mistake.
In our culture.
That's right. It doesn't make them a mistake. It's not. That doesn't mean that they should be killed.
Absolutely.
And I'm real worried. I'm real worried about the part that money plays in this. Because the money train is easy to follow here. Okay, this person has insurance. They require care. That care is expensive. The insurance companies are going to amortize that expense to the other insureds. My insurance goes up because this person's alive, so why don't we kill them? You see
it's good that you're bringing it up because you will never hear the compassion and choices people, the other side, the pro-assisted suicide people using the term around money. But Derek Humphrey, who's like the father of the assisted suicide movement in the U.S., he's the guy who sort of got the whole thing rolling. He regularly talks about it. He says, how much money can we save in our system simply by allowing for assisted suicide or euthanasia? And, in fact, he's right. But no one wants to talk about it because it's a taboo. Don't talk about money. Yet, in fact, you're absolutely correct. It is expensive to treat people. There's no question about it.
Right.
And if you look at the cost of health care only going up, and it's only going to go up as we have an aging population at the moment. People didn't have children. There's very few children, so therefore with fewer children and an aging population, you have an aging then group of people who you're insuring, and it costs more money. Who's kidding who? Let's be brutally honest about it. It's a lot cheaper just to kill them. But no one's going to talk about that. And in fact,
it
even
doesn't
if they
sound as
legalize
good.
it, in Oregon, there's no one overtly talking about that. It's the non-overt conversation. It's the behind-the-scenes what's happening to people that becomes the reality. And that's more important. What happens in the culture as you're seen as an expense rather than a gift.
Well, you're exactly right, and nobody's going to talk about the money because it doesn't sound as good. And so what we do, it's like, and I'm going to relate it again to capital punishment before we go to break, but it's what we do is we say, well, it'll deter crime. And in states where they impose the death penalty, it doesn't deter crime at all. In fact, some killers actually went to that state because they had a death penalty. And then they say, well, it's cheaper. And then we learned that, no, it's actually far more expensive to kill an inmate than house them even for life. But they don't tell you any of these things because if they told you these things, you wouldn't be as quick to support what it is that they've predetermined to be the path of least resistance, which in this case would be some sort of a governmental culling of the herd. You're getting the long version back after these messages.
There is a name in the Clarksville community we have come to associate with excellence in legal services. That name is Kimberly Turner and Associates, the attorneys who care. There are times in life when reliance on attorneys who care is particularly critical. Family strife is definitely among those times, whether it be divorce, child custody, juvenile delinquent petitions, alimony or child support increases, or any type of strife which invades our personal lives. Kim Turner and Associates are the attorneys who care. Call Kim today at 572-1134 or get an appointment. Perhaps you just stop by her place located at 130 Franklin Street next to the Black Horse. That's 572-1134. Kimberly Turner and Associates are the attorneys who care.
When
when Clarksville wants to hear what's going on.
One of the big issues that our state, really that our nation is facing is infrastructure, and it's transportation infrastructure. You know, there was something a couple of weeks ago that came out of Nashville from the Regional Transit Alliance, about $6 billion in potential upgrades to our transportation infrastructure, and that included light rail and some of those type things. But I really think our state legislature realizes that Tennessee Department of Transportation has this big backlog of projects, and they've got to do something about it.
They hear it on WJZM Radio.
A home is one of the biggest investments you can make. One of the best ways to start your house hunting is to contact a home loan pro you can trust. The 2015 Reader's Choice favorite banker, Matt McWhirter of F&M Mortgage. Call Matt McWhirter at 931-906-0006 or stop by the F&M office in Sango. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
Since 1941, serving the public interest. WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older, then we wouldn't have to wait so long? And wouldn't it be nice to live together in the kind of world where we belong?
You're getting the long version, and we have Alex Schadenberg on with us. He's the international chair of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and he is doing a lot to try to expose the truth. He has also helped produce a documentary confronting the euthanasia deception, and the name of it is Euthanasia Deception. And this podcast will be up later on my website, longversionw4j.com, under podcast. Alex, thank you so much for joining us on this particular topic. But how did you like my characterization of governmental culling of the herd? I mean, so that's what we're going to do, is we're going to legalize going through and getting rid of the parts of the species that have something that abnormalities or some, that have flaws. I mean, is that any different than genocide?
Alex is back here. So the fact of it is that the culture is moving the way that we have lost the sight of the fact that every human being has infinite value, and this is a serious problem. This is an absolute serious problem, because now it's okay to kill certain people. So where do we go with this? It's a very difficult situation, because you have to first say, well, we can never open that door. What we have to do is we have to be committed to properly caring for people, absolutely, without a question, but we can't open the door to killing people. Once you do that, the question is now only who? That's the only question.
Well, the problem is that if you open the door to killing people, and you start off with people that are terminally ill, then you go, well, what about people that are always struggling with psychological impairment? And what about the people that are terminally or almost perpetually depressed, for instance? It's like we talked about earlier. And so now you've expanded it to psychological impairments as well as physical disabilities. And then where does it go from there? Maybe we look at people whose long-term care is going to be too expensive, which is what's really happening. That's what they don't want to talk about, is the fact that this is just, in my estimation, this is Fletcher Long's opinion. I'm not throwing this on Alex, but in countries where this is going on, is I think that at somewhere you've got insurance companies that are saying, we don't want to have to continue to lay out money, because the insurance business is really set up to collect premiums. It's not really set up to pay claims. And we don't want to continue to have to pay for this expensive treatment. Why don't we just go kill these people?
Well, the question is going to become in the pressure. It's hard to say that anybody would ever say that to somebody, even though people with disabilities. For instance, in our video you hear this Amy Hasbrook, who's a Canadian leader in disability rights, saying, well, I've never known anyone who goes through a significant disability. She's blind. And she says, I've never known anyone that did not experience sometime in their life people saying to them, I wouldn't want to live like you.
Yeah.
Well, the same would be in this case. Someone now has whatever medical condition. They might have several months down the road, or they might actually be treatable still. We don't know. But the point of it is if the condition is very difficult, eventually someone's going to say to them, well, I wouldn't want to live like you. Well, you see, that's the ultimate rejection of your life. And you're already going, like, let's be honest about the human person. When I'm going through a difficult physical time, it affects me emotionally. That's how I am. I am a human being, right? I'm a physical, psychological, social, I'm a spiritual being. I'm all these things, and I'm interconnected. So if you're going to say that to me, the result is I might feel that I guess my life isn't worth living. And that becomes the end result. That becomes the fait accompli. We say, oh, it was their choice. Was it their choice? Can you answer me honestly and say, oh, it was their choice? This was really all about their freedom. No, that's just, as I said, these are the flags we wave, freedom, autonomy, choice. It's not really about that. But as for the money thing, there's this innate pressure that comes on you, especially when the wife is coming to visit you all the time. And the question becomes, at what point have I become too great a burden for others?
Right.
And when you look at the stats in Oregon, what are the main reasons for people asking for assisted suicide? Is it to end pain? Well, that's a very tiny number of people who are asking for assisted suicide based on pain. It's actually very tiny. In fact, a study was done a few years ago by Linda Ganzini, who's not against assisted suicide. She's in favor of it. She did a study on why people were asking for it. She had 58 people who had asked for assisted suicide, and she wanted to know all the reasons why. So this is more of an interview process rather than a tick box process. And she determined that none of them, not one of them, rated their pain as greater than a 2 out of 5. Right? She said, well, rate your reasons. But people saying, I feel like a burden on others. I've lost my abilities to do things. I've lost my autonomy. These were the reasons. These are social reasons why people are asking for death.
Well, and we had a case that we covered on the long version, and I don't know if you know of this, Alex, but you may. But there was a teenage girl that undertook quite strident measures to talk her boyfriend into killing himself. You remember that, John Michaels? And let me lay this out and see. She was a teenage girl, and he had said he wanted to kill himself. And then he would say, well, he wasn't sure if he wanted to do it, and she kept cajoling him to do it. And he ended up killing himself, and I think they charged her with an offense. Alex, are you familiar with this?
I am familiar with the situation, yes.
Well, that test case is something that should be alarming, because this was a kid that wanted to commit suicide because he was a teenager. There's a lot of teenagers that think that they didn't get the prom date they wanted, and that might be a reason to check out. But he was actually wanting to live, and I wonder how many doctors have done this same thing in places where there's doctor-assisted euthanasia. But he actually decided he wanted to live, and this girl took great pains to talk him out of his decision to live. And
well, we had the case that was the Canadian girl, and online. She was online with a nurse from Minnesota. His name was William Melkert Dinkle, and he was charged with her assisted suicide as well as the assisted suicide of a young man in the UK. And both of them, he joined these. So what had happened is Melkert Dinkle had a bit of a suicide fixation. So he joined these, at the time, it was sort of like an online talk group for people who were going through deep depression and who were suicidal that was set up. And he went on there not to help people, but because he wanted to convince them to commit suicide in front of their webcam. He had a voyeuristic interest. And so this is what he did. So think about that. Here you have a girlfriend convincing her boyfriend that, yes, it is the right idea. Here you had a nurse from Minnesota who told them he was a woman, and in fact he was a man, who was convincing this young woman that, yes, she should kill herself, and please do it by hanging in front of your webcam. So you have people who have got really weird ideas. Now, you put it in the same sense. You're talking about human beings. You're talking about human pressure. There are very few really weird people like Melkert Dinkle. There's only a few of them. But, it doesn't take a lot of them to cause a great problem. Let's think about even Kevorkian. Kevorkian himself had this real fixation on death. We know that he did a lot of his paintings with blood. He wrote about death on a regular basis. He was fixated with death. And so now he becomes a euthanasia guy. And the fact of it is that a lot of the people that he was involved with killing were not terminally ill at all. In fact, a study came out showing that most of his victims were women, and a large number of them were not terminally ill at all. But it didn't matter to him. He had a fixation with death, and somehow he actually seemed to enjoy it. So, we're selling freedom and autonomy when in fact you're getting the situation where you're opening yourself up to being abused, and it's the ultimate abuse because it's your life.
Well, when I first heard of the girl that had talked her boyfriend into killing himself and saw where she was being charged, my first thought, as having formerly been a lawyer, my first thought was, good Lord, how in the world do you charge her with, talking someone into committing a crime? How is that sufficient enough evil action on her part to constitute the criminal culpability requisite to commit the offense? And then, as I read more about it, I mean, she really did kill him just as much as if she had just pulled the trigger herself. I mean, I became a lot less critical of the charging authorities for charging her because she really did talk him into it. And that's your fear when you talk about physician-assisted euthanasia. Your fear is how much influence are the physicians having over the decision-making process of the person who kills themselves, and is that influence that is being wielded legitimately and innocuously, or do they have some sort of Kevorkian death fixation? You have to ask those questions.
That's exactly it. But the fact is when you open the door to it, that's the problem. We should never open the door to it. We should never. You were mentioning before the commercial break about your opposition to capital punishment, and I share your belief completely. But I go one step further. I don't believe you should ever give the power, and in the case of capital punishment, you government agents now having the power over somebody else's life and death. You should never give the power over life and death to somebody else. And that's what we're doing with assisted suicide and euthanasia. We're giving the power for somebody else to kill us. And it's never safe, and it's never, ever going to result in a better society which has more equality and more dignity. It will not happen.
And we've also learned in Oregon that it's not lowering the suicide rate in Oregon for people that are not committing, they're not getting a physician assistance. The suicide rate in Oregon, outside of the context of physician assisted suicide, has gone up.
Right. So what you see is you've seen, now first of all, Oregon did always have a higher suicide rate. It is interesting when you look at the data that states which approve of assisted suicide often are states that have a higher suicide rate to begin with. There seems to be that sort of connection whether we like it or not. But there was a research done last year looking at the whole question of Oregon's suicide rate, and what it concluded was, in fact, suicide rate has actually gone up on a regular basis in Oregon. And then they looked at the numbers, and they say, so what they wanted to do is they did a proper research study, and what they came up with is that assisted suicide was associated with at least a 6.3% increase in the rate of suicide deaths. So what they did is they tried to eliminate any other factors that might be in the cause to say this is as conservative a response we can give you. But the reason for that as being important is the other side, the assisted suicide lobby, they argue that, in fact, legalizing assisted suicide would lower the suicide rate, and they say it's because people who are going through terrible pain and suffering won't have to commit suicide. They can have assisted suicide. But the data shows actually the opposite is true, that when you take away the suicide, how would you say, taboo, that in fact what happens is the suicide rate increases, not decreases.
Yeah, and I think that's what causes the increase, is that you've lessened the taboo.
That's correct. The other thing about it is you would then say, well, what about these homicide suicides? Because that's another issue, because obviously homicide suicide is usually an elderly couple, not always, but usually an elderly couple. Almost always it's the husband who kills the wife. So usually in homicide suicide, and it's become fairly prevalent in homicide suicide, you have an elderly couple where the wife has become ill, usually, and the husband kills the wife, homicide, and then kills himself, suicide. And you would think that the homicide suicide rate would clearly then have to reduce in states where assisted suicide was legal, because they would say, well, assisted suicide is an option. In fact, in Idaho a few years ago, the Compassion and Choice has tried to use that argument to pressure Idaho to legalize assisted suicide, and it failed completely because, in fact, they were using the example of a couple in Idaho who were well known, where the husband killed his wife, who was sick, and then he committed suicide. He killed himself. But in fact, if you look at the data, the opposite is true. What's true about homicide-suicide when you look at the data, and there's been a lot of research done on it, it's almost always a controlling husband. I'm not saying it always is. It's almost always a controlling husband. It's always a situation where the husband had been, how would you say, there had been abuse within the relationship. And now you have a situation where you have a wife who's dependent, and the husband then kills his wife based on his unwillingness to care for her in her dependent condition. And in turn, then he kills himself. So you have a controlling husband who's taking, and that's not about assisted suicide. That's about a person who's got serious problems, and allowing the state to kill her first would not actually reduce the homicide-suicide rate. In fact, that's what the stats show. There's no reduction in homicide-suicide in states where they legalize assisted suicide.
Now I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The other thing is the terrible suicides, the ones that are, because that's the other argument by Compassion Choices. It will at least reduce those violent suicide deaths. But in fact, that's not true either. When you look at the data, there's no reduction at all whatsoever in the number of violent suicides when you legalize assisted suicide. When we look at even the Netherlands, where euthanasia is legal, you've had a significant increase in the suicide rate since the legalization. And I'm not just saying that, it's just been a small amount. No, if you look at the data, you have about a 30% increase in the suicide rate in the Netherlands, and yet you have euthanasia as common. And when you look at how would you say, those terrible suicides, the ones that were just absolutely horrific, the numbers have not dropped whatsoever.
You have a blog spot, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and you've got a story on there from an Oregon doctor named Kenneth Stevens. And one thing that he talks about is the importance of trust between a patient and doctor. And he himself was involved. He said that he first became involved with assisted suicide in 1982 before his first wife died of cancer. And he said that they had just made their last visit with her doctor, and as they were leaving the office, he said he could provide her with an extra large dose of pain medication. She said she didn't need it because she had managed her pain and it was under control. And it just kind of dawned on her at that point that her doctor wanted her to kill herself. I mean, and she actually looks at her husband and says, Ken, I think he wants me to kill myself. It seems to me that would, I mean, I don't know how in a doctor-patient setting the way that, I don't know how you don't completely, people go to their doctor because they want support and encouragement, really, not encouragement to take their own life. There's a whole lot to being a doctor that doesn't have anything to do with pills or needles. I mean, there's sometimes the best medicine, old doctors used to tell me, is to go up and pat them on the shoulder and tell them everything's going to be all right. And instead, here you have a physician taking a role that's fundamentally incompatible with his role as a healer. We'll come back and talk more about this. You're getting the long version.
WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
Keller Williams affiliate broker Jackie Harker knows a family's most valuable asset, whether buying or selling, is the home. Jackie Harker with Keller Williams Realty in Clarksville, Tennessee would tell you her most important investment is in you. Whether buying or selling a mansion or a starter, the smart money is placed with Harker. Keller Williams' Jackie Harker will work tirelessly to make sure your buying or selling experience will be pleasant and your expectations will be exceeded. Call Keller Williams' Jackie Harker at 931-801-3946 today for all your home buying or selling needs. That's 931-801-3946. And remember, whether buying or selling a mansion or a starter, the smart money is placed with Harker. 931-801-3946. Jackie Harker. Call her today. A lot of real estate is bought and sold in Clarksville, and all of it has to be inspected, and it has to be done right. It's your largest investment of your life. Do you want to leave its inspection to someone who isn't the best? Of course not. 931-980-5759 gets you the best inspection services. Call Bud Wink at 931-980-5759 to get the home you are buying or selling inspected by the best inspection services. That's 931-980-5759. The best inspection services, changing the quality of home inspections one house at a time.
WJZM Radio and WJZM.com is where Clarksville hears the news. If it's going on in Clarksville, it's on WJZM Radio and at WJZM.com. Since 1941, WJZM Radio has been Clarksville's broadcast leader for local news, sports, and current events. Depend on WJZM and WJZM.com to hear what's going on in Clarksville. If it's news, you'll hear it on WJZM Radio and WJZM.com. Clarksville's information station is WJZM Radio and WJZM.com.
Many people simply believe they will never get in trouble with the law or need a lawyer, whether it's the sobering event beginning with blue lights in the rear view and ending with an arrest for DUI, being charged with a crime, or some unfortunate episode has occurred. The law office of Lynn Morton realizes you may not have planned on needing an attorney. Going to court without a professional qualified lawyer will result in disastrous consequences or an outcome in your case that causes havoc in your life for years. You need representation by a lawyer who not only has specialized knowledge, but who truly understands the anxiety, confusion, and devastation faced by someone facing criminal accusations or dealing with an array of other legal problems. Having an experienced, committed advocate like Lynn Morton on your side can make all the difference in your case. With support and guidance, you will have the ability to face your legal situation with confidence that can only come from knowing your case is in capable, dependable hands. Lynn Morton is dedicated to safeguarding her clients' rights and providing them with the attention and consideration their case and future deserve. For these most bitter moments, Lynn Morton can step forward to lend a helping hand and guide you through every aspect. Call Lynn Morton in your most trying time of need. 931-906-0000.
Since 1941, serving the public interest. WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
You're getting the long version. We have Alex Schadenberg from the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. He is the international chair. He's calling us from Canada today. And Alex, we really appreciate you coming. I've got a comment from a listener that I wanted to read to you. This listener from Kentucky says, "This is the devaluing of life that starts with abortion. It is not convenient. The care and expense is more than I want to do," is what these people think. Then you have prescription babies in humans, old people who have quit being useful, so you help them out the door with assisted euthanasia. It is called selfish society. Your comment?
Well, certainly this has become a society that is only concerned about me, myself, and I, and I'm not talking about Alex. I'm talking about a society that's concerned about the individual only.
Yeah.
And they have then said that, you know, if I'm ever in a situation which I consider to lack convenience for me, or that it will not fit my wants, then I would want to have my life ended. The problem with all that concept is all based on a lie from the beginning. It's based on a lie on the basic nature of the human person. And I do believe there's a nature to the human person. I do believe we are a certain way for a certain reason, and we are emotional, we are psychological, we are spiritual, we are also interdependent. Not one person on this earth has come there without somebody else being the reason for them being able to be here first. Nobody on this earth exists without someone else caring for them or being there with them in their life. We strive and we are successful when we are in families. So therefore, to say, oh, it's all about me, assumes that it doesn't affect anyone else, but it also assumes that no one else is involved in the decision, etc. It's a lie. And I think of the whole case of Tom Mortier. How did this affect him? And he talks about that. When his mother died by euthanasia, she was depressed. I'm not saying there isn't anything terrible about depression and, oh, it wasn't easy. No, I understand that she was going through a difficult time of her life. There's no question about it. No one is minimizing that. But she died by euthanasia. How did that affect Tom? Well, Tom lost his mother. He had already lost his father to suicide many years earlier. Tom's children, they lost their grandmother. Tom's sister lost her mother. And Tom says, my mother didn't even say to me, oh, by the way, Tom, I'm going to be dying by euthanasia. It was a shock. You see him talking about it in the video. He's at work, and his wife calls him saying, you have to contact the hospital, something to do with your mother. He contacts the hospital, and they ask him, what are we to do with your mother's body? This is a shock. He's thinking, my mother didn't have cancer, my mother's not sick, was it a car accident? What happened to my mother? He finds out his mother died by euthanasia. And he says, I didn't even get a chance to say to my mom, no, Mom, we love you. We want you to be here with us. He didn't even get a chance to say, please do not do this. Didn't get a chance whatsoever. You hear then also about this Etienne Montero. He's a dean of the Faculty of Law in Belgium, of a Faculty of Law in Belgium, saying, well, what's happened in Belgium is the law has been interpreted very widely. So what started as a law which we believed would only be for terminal illness, even though the law didn't say that. The law never said it was only for terminal illness.
Right.
But we thought it would be for that. It would only be for those few cases, become wide open. And then you hear this Dr. Benoit Bousselin, who's a palliative care doctor and an oncologist, saying, you know, the problem now is people get a first diagnosis of cancer. They might be treatable, they might not be treatable, but they get a first diagnosis. They are far away from death. They might have several years of good life left in them. When they hear that, they're saying, I want euthanasia. They die by euthanasia. He says, the whole culture has become a deep culture of death. What about depression? But what about Alzheimer's? Dr. Bruselig makes it very clear. In Belgium now, someone gets the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. A few weeks later, they're dead. Well, they might have had many years before they even became, how would you say, incapable of fully remembering the past.
Right. You know, we did an Alzheimer's show, and there's actually 6 or 7, I don't remember exactly, stages of Alzheimer's. And there's at least 4 to 5 stages that before you actually get to a stage where you have the fundamental short-term memory loss. So.
And then what about Steve Passmore? Steve Passmore is a disability rights activist in Canada saying, hey, look at me, my disability, he has cerebral palsy, he says, my disability, I'm in a situation where I'm dependent on the state. The state sends me a check every month, I can pay my rent, I can live. He says, if I didn't have friends who helped me shop, I couldn't go shopping. How could I go to the grocery store in my physical condition? I couldn't do it, but I have friends who help me, but I'm dependent on the state. At what point is the state going to start saying, well, we might not tell him to die, but they're going to be encouraging, well, in this situation, really, isn't euthanasia the better situation? Because for the rest of his life, it's not that he is saying, oh, he's defeatist. He has a life condition. He's not going to get better. This is how he is. It's just how he is. In the past, society would have said, we will do what we can to ensure that people with disabilities have as equal a life as before. Once you legalize euthanasia, they look at you differently.
Yeah,
the same idea is once you're in a drought and the water starts evaporating, the animals look at each other differently.
Right.
It's the same thing here amongst humans.
Well, and that's very true. And let me tell you, I'm not a big fan of government. And the problem, I think, with America's justice system is this perception that government is somehow infallible, but they're manned by a inherently fallible creature, being human beings. But the thing, it won't take long at all before governments start trying, if euthanasia is legal, start trying to talk people into that option to avoid having to continue to send the check off of which this gentleman has been living and paying his rent. They prize money over us anyway. I mean, they clearly do. It's not just the insurance industry. They clearly do. And then you have the insurance company saying, you know what, why don't you talk him into euthanasia because we don't want to undertake this treatment regimen. And before long, you know what you're going to have, Alex, is you're going to have insurance companies bonusing doctors who can cajole patients into that euthanasia option.
Well, that is the long-term outcome, but what really makes it sad for me is that in so many cases now, the culture has changed to the point where someone is now saying, my life doesn't have value if I live that way. People have become preconditioned to believe that that is the right thing, that is what I now will do. Society is now my king. They've convinced me, I've been convinced by the cultural attitude that that is the right way to go. And in fact, that's not the right way to go, and it leads to a problem, a serious problem, where we are ending the lives of people. I'll go even further, and I'll say, Dr. Catherine Dobsche, we interviewed her, and you hear we have the English overview tone. She's in Belgium, she only spoke French, and she's explaining, her patients. She's a palliative care physician. She's caring for these patients. She's saying, my patients are dying with dignity. I care for them. I make sure that they're not suffering. But on top of it, she says, what does it mean to care for somebody? And she says, as a palliative care doctor, I've learned that my presence or the presence of others is so important in caring for others. But the culture has become a euthanasia culture in Belgium, she says. And what it means is that we're abandoning people. We're not caring for them, and that leads to a greater pressure for euthanasia because people don't want to be not cared for. They don't want to be abandoned. She says, but my role continues. I continue to be at the bedside and to care for people and to truly give them a death with dignity. That's true death with dignity. That's what we agree. We've lost sight of what it meant to be a human being. I become a better person because I cared for the other. Or I could be a cold, heartless person and ignore the other or abandon the other or kill the other. And that's where we're going to. And it's a very sad situation. We cannot open that door. In the States, like California just legalized assisted suicide. I don't know if you realize that. They just did it, and it just became illegal in California starting in July the 8th or 9th. And that's a major state with a lot of financial issues, massive deficits, all these things going on. Plus you have this massive state of a lot of disparities in California. What's going to happen? Like in Oregon, you say, that's just a small state. It's a tiny place.
Yeah, but California's not. Yeah.
I'm very concerned with the direction of where things are going. And then you add Obamacare to the mix. You're having more and more state-controlled health care. Well, there's pressure being put on doctors to say, no, we shouldn't pay for that. No, we shouldn't. Well, sometimes then death starts seeing to be the reasonable outcome.
How much influence, because you obviously these topics seem to intermix, how much influence is the insurance industry having on doctors' prescribed care plans?
Well, you're asking me a question, and I'm a Canadian, and so that's a very difficult question to ask me. I can only talk to you about what happens in Canada, and I can only say
well, that's fine because Canada.
But certainly in Canada, it's state-controlled health care, and certain things are not paid for. It's that simple. They simply can't, or it's got severe limitations on it because that's just the reality. The other thing is in Canada, you wait for certain treatments. You simply wait. You wait in line. You need your hip replaced. Sometimes the hip replacement might happen next year, and you have to wait and wait in line because there's only so many surgeries done per year, and that's it. So you get in the line, you get in the queue, and that's just what goes on because they have to control the cost. And when it's state-controlled, they control the cost. They determine what happens. And doctors lose more and more of that control because they're given rules. If you have this health condition, then, well, we could help you, but, you're probably not getting better anymore. So therefore, we're not going to help you. We're going to decide instead to give you pain control and symptom management only, and that will be that. And this is where it goes, and it's sort of normal. It's not to be it's not to be said, isn't that terrible? That's where it is, and that's where you're going in the U.S. They have to control the cost because it's becoming too high.
Well, Alex, I asked you that question because you're a Canadian, because it's the Canadian system and the French is what's generally lauded over our heads and used as the example of why we should have socialized medicine in the United States, because it works very well in Canada. So that's my question to you as an American. Does it work, in your estimation, very well?
Some things work very well and a lot of things don't. So, for instance, if I had a massive coronary this morning and I was brought straight to the hospital, to the emergency department, they would react immediately, without a question, especially since I'm a reasonably young man. I'm a reasonably healthy man. They would react immediately. I would have, let's say I had a blockage of my arteries. They would take me in as an emergency. It would happen very quick. But let's say I was really tired all the time, just constantly tired. So I'd go to my doctor, and they would have to put me through a series of tests to determine whether I have a blockage in the artery or not. Every single test, every single thing takes time. They have to book it. It moves along. If it's an emergency, they're actually quite good. I have to admit they're quite good about that. But if I'm going in because I'm not quite hitting that emergency point, I've got to wait in line for everything. So this is what becomes the problem. Now, my daughter's husband, so my son-in-law's mother was recently also diagnosed with brain cancer. So that was very sad, very, very sad. And she is terminally ill. And in the end, they're saying there's nothing we can do to prevent her from dying. She's going to live however long she lives. But they did do the surgery, and they did do it reasonably quick because she did have a large tumor, and they realized that would have a great palliative effect by removing as much of the tumor as they could, and that would allow her to live a comfortable life while she was living until the end. They did act reasonably quick. But other things, I have friends who need hip replacements. How long does that take? 9 months? A year? You can't go out of the system and pay for it unless you go to the U.S. You can't go to the doctor and say, oh, by the way, I have saved up $250,000 here, and I'm willing to spend X amount of dollars. Can you, I would say, move me quicker into the queue? Can't do it. A few years ago, the premier of Newfoundland went to Florida for his heart surgery. Well, why did he do that? They could do that same surgery in Canada. Why did they do that? Because he knew it would be politically bad for him to be jumping the queue. So, but he was wealthy. He was a multimillionaire himself. So
right.
He went to Florida for his surgery where he could have it done immediately, and there wasn't an issue. There was no political issue of jumping the queue. And what are they going to say? Oh, a wealthy man spent his own money? That's terrible? No. The question becomes, well, why couldn't he have that surgery in Canada? Well, he could have, actually.
He just couldn't have had it as quickly. Yeah. Right. He couldn't have had it nearly as quick.
No, you're right. And he had the money, so it didn't matter to him.
So,
but no, that he would have had to wait if he had it in Canada, without a question.
Overall, do you think that socialized medicine is something to which America should aspire, or should it avoid? What are your thoughts?
So as a person who believes in justice, I believe everyone should have access to health care. But at the same time, I recognize that socialized medicine puts everything in control of the government and its budgets. And so you have to have a mixed system, without a question. You need to have a system that allows everyone to have health care who needs it. And yet at the same time, if you have money, you should be able to buy out of the system. Now, we don't have that in Canada. So in certain countries, like in the UK and other places, you have a dual system where if you're wealthy, you can buy your care outside of the system. And but in Canada, that is illegal. You cannot go and buy your care outside of the system. There are certain clinics that do minor things. So you can go to a clinic, you can pay a bit of money, you have to have a minor thing done. But anything major, you cannot go out of the system. And in fact, they will shut you down if you try and have that done outside of the system. So it's a serious problem. But we also have massive deficits. We have massive government deficits and massive financial problems in Canada. And what are we going to do about it? Because the fact of it is health care is run by the province, so that would be your state, and yet the provinces are running massive deficits. There has to be a give at some point. You can't have a situation with universal health care and massive deficits and not expect it to break eventually. And that's what's happening. The hospitals are saying we don't have enough money to run our system anymore.
Well, Alex, we got to go to break. We got to go to break. We'll be with more of the long version of Alex Schadenberg and the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition after these messages. A home is one of the biggest investments you can make. One of the best ways to start your house hunting is to contact a home loan pro you can trust. The 2015 Reader's Choice favorite banker, Matt McWhirter of F&M Mortgage.
Call Matt McWhirter at 931-906-0006 or stop by the F&M office in Sango. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
We're here walking for my son Nicholas,
my daughter Kaylee,
for my sweetie Gianna.
Who are you walking for at the next Autism Speaks walk?
For our sons.
My dear friend Scott.
We walk for Ashley.
and I'm here to walk for them as well as the many of million people that have to deal with autism throughout their life.
It's just bringing everyone together to show our love and support.
Join us at our next walk sponsored by Alpha Zeta Delta. Register and donate at autismspeakswalk.org.
Please donate today to Autism Speaks.
There is a name in the Clarksville community we have come to associate with excellence in legal services. That name is Kimberly Turner and Associates, the attorneys who care. There are times in life when reliance on attorneys who care is particularly critical. Family strife is definitely among those times, whether it be divorce, child custody, juvenile delinquent petitions, alimony or child support increases, or any type of strife which invades our personal lives. Kim Turner and Associates are the attorneys who care. Call Kim today at 572-1134 or get an appointment. Perhaps you just stop by her place located at 130 Franklin Street next to the Black Horse. That's 572-1134. Kimberly Turner and Associates are the attorneys who care.
Since 1941, serving the public interest. WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
This is the long version, and we've been having a chat with Alex Shadenberg with the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Alex, I've tweeted out a real nice picture of you. You appear to be in Ottawa at the time, speaking somewhere. I got it, I guess, from your publicist or one of the people that are involved with the documentary, The Euthanasia Deception. Let me ask you this question. How much resistance do you get out there when you're going around trying to educate people about this deception that's being perpetuated against them?
Well, the situation is that a lot of people have bought into the lie. And what's sad about the culture is a lot of people who have bought into a lie also are unwilling to look at it openly because it's all about a worldview for them. And this shouldn't be about a worldview in that sense. They would say, well, I should have the right to die. And I'm looking at that saying, well, let's analyze that point of view. You're saying you should have a right to die. Well, first of all, a right to suicide is another issue, and the culture has never thought that that was a good idea to have a right to suicide because most people commit suicide when they're going through deep mental illness or deep depression, or they're going through such a stress in their life. And most often those times are able to pass, meaning that with the right care, the right support, the right network of people who support you, you'll go past that. There was a case of the woman in Belgium who was talking about euthanasia, who was going through severe depression. She was approved for euthanasia. She was a 22-year-old who had wanted euthanasia even though she was not in any way physically ill. She was saying she had suicidal thoughts since the age of 7. Now that seems pretty sad to me that a young woman would have suicidal ideation, since the age of 7. But when I put out that article, the number of people who emailed me or put comments on the blog or sent me comments, how can I talk to her? I went through the same thing. I also suffered suicidal ideation for years and years. I went through deep depression. I was going through, a type of a mental illness for so many years, and it was very harsh and distressing upon me. So I'm not in any way saying, oh, that doesn't occur, and oh, well, maybe it's just... No, people go through that, I understand. But that's not a reason to give them a lethal injection. And we have to understand this. So there is no right to suicide, and there should never be a right to suicide. But when we're talking about euthanasia and assisted suicide, it's not even about that. It's about somebody else being involved in law, by law, being allowed to do this. And I think that's the whole reality that comes out. So somebody else now should be involved in lethally injecting you when you're going through that deep, dark, difficult time of your life. And as a human being, I recognize we all go through deep, dark, difficult times of our life. And so now death becomes the option for when I am going through my distressing time in my life, rather than finding peer support, finding a supportive community, having the proper type of medical care, whether that just be pain control and symptom management, or that just be a supportive environment that recognizes my situation. Like, let's be brutally honest. This is not utopia. I live in Canada, and certainly not utopia, even though some people think it is. And you don't live in utopia either. I'm sorry to say it. It's not utopia, and neither is Oregon or California or Belgium or the Netherlands. We're dealing with human beings.
Right. I'll be the first to concede. I'll be the first to concede that I do not live in utopia.
There you go. We agree completely. We do not live in utopia.
Yeah.
And we're not like a computer. You can program to do this and you can do that, and it'll always do the same thing unless, of course, it gets some sort of breakdown in its memory. It's not like that. We are influenced by our emotions, our psychology, and we have discrimination within our system. Don't tell me that people with disabilities are lying, that this is what they're experiencing in their everyday life. I'm sorry to say that that's a reality. A lot of human beings are crass and cold. I'm sorry that that's the reality. But don't legalize assisted suicide and assume that there won't be pressure put on them. That's a joke. It's the way it is as a human being. Some of us are actually very nice human beings who are very kind, who would never want to harm somebody else, and others would look at you and say, well, why should you live? Who would want to live like you?
Yeah. And it's the devaluing of human life that's the most troubling. And like you said in the documentary with Hendrik Reitzma's granddad, that, we don't even know that he even requested assistance with his death. We just don't know.
No, in fact, he didn't request it. It was clear that he didn't. It was just a comment made by the doctor to his grandmother, so to Hendrik Reitzman's grandfather's wife. Do you want us to make sure he's kept comfortable? That was the question.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how she understood the question to be. And her response was, well, of course I want him to be kept comfortable. He was not even near to death. He had cancer, but as Hendrik says, his sister is a physician, and she said, well, he might have as much as 3 years left in his current state.
When I heard that story...
But the point was they took that as, oh, it's okay to kill him.
When I heard that story, you were very kind to send me the documentary. And when I heard the story about Reitzma's, the question, do you want us to keep him comfortable? And, of course, she said yes. The next thing they know, they've killed him. That's one of those stories where you have to start looking for what was the possible motive. There's got to be some nefarious pecuniary motive for why this doctor went to such length to interpret that response as a request for a lethal injection.
I don't think there was anything nefarious at all. I think this is a doctor who had gotten used to doing euthanasia, and the grandfather they admit he had been in some pain. He wasn't suffering incredibly, but he had certainly been in some pain. And the result was he was thinking, well, if this is what she wants, let's go ahead and do this.
You don't think there was anybody somewhere saying, you got to get this dude off of our back financially? You don't think there anywhere that some adjuster somewhere was suggesting to him that this guy's treatment was too expensive? Because that's the fear.
No, I think this is a euthanasia-minded doctor who was doing euthanasia regularly and who looked at this elderly man thinking, well, we can help you out of your pain and suffering. We can get this done nice and easy. I really think that people what happens is the very first time you kill somebody, it's a very hard thing to do it. I know that as a human being, that it would be very hard for someone to kill someone. But after it's been done a few times, well, what's so hard about it now? What's so difficult about killing somebody once you've done it a few times already?
That's what serial killers have related when they're studied, is that the hardest thing was the first time.
Serial killer, he was involved in 130.
Yeah, he was considered a serial killer, yeah.
Look at this Dr. Wim Disselmans in Belgium. He is the head of the Euthanasia Commission in Belgium. But he's also the guy who runs the Euthanasia Clinic in Belgium. He does hundreds and hundreds of approvals of euthanasia. He's like the key guy. And yet he gets in front of the media and he makes himself look like he's some sort of wonderful king. He's become a bit of a rock star for those people who really support this in Belgium. And he just sort of stands out there saying, well, isn't this wonderful that we have this? It's absolutely crazy. I did a debate in Belgium a few years ago. In 2013, I debated this Dr. Jan Bernheim, who was like the kingpin of the pro-euthanasia movement at the time when they legalized it. So he's very proud of his involvement in getting euthanasia legalized. And he says, we've eliminated suffering in Belgium. Like, talking about utopia, you've not eliminated suffering. You're eliminating people's lives. You're killing people. Who's kidding who here? And then I talked about, well, this is the data in Belgium. The data in Belgium shows that about half of the euthanasia deaths are never reported. And he knows that. He admits that. He also, if you look at the data, a large number, over 1,000 a year actually, are euthanized without ever requesting it in Belgium. And you see that in the data. There's several studies that have come out showing that exact data. And so I started talking about some stories of individuals, just so I'm throwing the data. He never questioned my data when I'm debating him. He understood the stories, and what does he get up there and do in his response to me? He says, well, there's problems with the Belgian euthanasia law. My response is, well, that's awful cold comfort for the dead.
Yeah.
What you have is a system where people have become used to killing, and there's no oversight. Why is there no oversight? Well, there's no oversight because the doctor, it's the same in Oregon, Washington State, and California. The doctor who does the death sends in a report. It's a self-reporting system. So when the person did not really qualify or there was good alternatives to that person, is the doctor going to self-report abuse of the law? No.
No.
And the second problem in Belgium is who controls the commission? Dr. Wim Disselmans. Who's the one who heads the euthanasia clinic? Dr. Wim Disselmans. Who's the one who approves all the controversial cases? Dr. Wim Disselmans. Is he ever going to investigate himself for what he's been doing? Absolutely not.
No, we know that policing ourselves.
Situation. So they send us a report every year, whether that be Oregon or Belgium, and they say this is how many deaths occurred, and then they say, well, there's so many deaths that we don't have the data on, and that's something else we need to talk about, especially the Washington State report, because it tells us a lot more than the Oregon report.
Well, and another thing to consider, and this is going to sound outlandish when I first say it, but I know something of people that violate the law, having before been an attorney for so long. But you're going to have deaths that occur where if you legalize assisted suicide, physician or otherwise, you're going to have people try to assert as a defense that they may be charged with the murder of a relative and say that, well, they wanted me to assist them to move on to the next world, and or move on to whatever's next. You're going to have that asserted as a defense in murder cases. It's going to come up.
Absolutely. Once you legalize assisted suicide, then obviously someone who can afford a good lawyer in certain cases will be able to argue that, in fact, it was an assisted suicide, and the only thing they did wrong was they did not get approval by the doctor, that this was someone who wanted this. But let's even look at the Washington State data. It's very important to understand that even in the U.S., so you had 213 lethal prescriptions in 2015 in Washington State and 166 reported assisted suicide deaths. So the other side argues that about one-third, they just had the lethal dose to feel comfortable. But, of course, it's not true, because when you look at the data, it shows 12 deaths, the ingestion status, the death status was simply unknown. We don't know what happened to them. We know they died. We just don't know. No report came in whatsoever. So we're not talking about Belgium or the Netherlands. We're talking about Washington State. 12 deaths. They just have no idea what happened to those people. And 11 of those people are still alive today. So when you actually take out the numbers, you realize that there are cases out there, we don't know what happened. There's a lethal dose sitting around someone's bedroom. They might have taken it or not taken it. We don't know. There's no report been sent in. There's no data. There's no anything. And this is how you're supposed to feel safe. Do you feel safe when a doctor can prescribe lethal drugs and it sits around your home and then your grandchildren come visit?
What if they pick it up and what if they pick it up and ingest it? Somebody from Oklahoma has asked this question of you, Alex. Well, they've made a comment, but I want you to comment on it. This person in Oklahoma says, I can't imagine people being cruel enough to keep me alive if I am in pain with no hope. What do you say to that?
Because there's a lot of assumptions to that question off the bat, and that is that you're in pain with no hope, and that there's that we're somehow keeping you alive this way. And the fact of it is that being in pain assumes that there's nothing we can do for your pain. The second thing is no hope. How do you define hope? Like, let's be brutally honest here. Is there no death with dignity as I die a natural death? Having your family around you, or having people who care for you around you, having people who are trying in every way to ensure that your life has value until the very end, is that not a death with dignity? Like, this whole thing about no hope. What do you mean by no hope? No hope in a human sense means that no one cares for you. And there's a lot of people in our culture, I agree, that no one cares for you. And that's a serious problem. That's an absolute serious problem, that we've had a breakdown of the family, we've got a breakdown of attitudes, and there are so many people who die alone. That's ridiculous, and I think that's the most serious problem we have going on in our culture today, that we have so much loneliness today than ever before, yet we have so many people who have time on their hands who could actually be with you, care about you, and develop a relationship with you. But this whole thing about I'm in endless pain with no hope I don't really know what you're talking about, really. It's a definition to wave a flag to say these are the reasons. All I can tell you is the data. Studies out of Oregon, Washington State, Netherlands, they all show almost nobody is asking for euthanasia because of uncontrolled pain. Nobody. Almost nobody. As I say, I mentioned the Ganzini study out of Oregon. 58 people who had asked for assisted suicide. She does a questionnaire system with them. Nobody rated their pain as greater than 2 out of 5. Fear of suffering, yes. In pain and suffering uncontrolled? No. So does that mean that no one has that experience? No. But that's not why people are asking for euthanasia or assisted suicide. That's just how we're selling it to the culture. We're saying to the culture, oh, all these people are in uncontrolled pain. Isn't it terrible of these uncaring people like Alex Schadenberg? And in fact, I believe in proper pain control. I believe that we should be very involved with making sure that you're not suffering. There's no reason in the culture today that you should be suffering uncontrolled pain. There's just no reason for that. That, to me, is a form of abuse.
Yeah, and I want to take issue with another part of the comment where the woman in Oklahoma says, keeping me alive. This is not a situation where you're putting someone on life support that would be dead without it. I mean, it's not. This has nothing to do with being cruel and keeping you alive. What this has to do is not ending someone's life.
Well, I'm just simply saying that no one should be involved with killing you.
Right.
There should never be a law that allows my doctor or my wife or whoever else to be directly involved with causing my death. It's simply not a safe idea. Let's be honest. We live in the culture together. We all have different beliefs and opinions on things, and together we have to recognize that there needs to be a certain level of protection for all human beings. You cannot say, oh, it will not affect Alex if my doctor has the right to kill me. Of course it affects Alex, because then when I'm sick, I go to that same doctor. And when that doctor has, let's give you a basic example. Someone has multiple sclerosis, and they go to a doctor and they ask for euthanasia or assisted suicide, and the doctor says, that seems very reasonable, we'll approve you. You die by euthanasia or assisted suicide. The next patient comes in with multiple sclerosis. Guess what? He's looking at them thinking, do you think your condition is almost identical to the previous? It seems very similar. That was such a good outcome and an easy outcome last time. The whole attitude has changed towards how we care for you once we're allowed to kill you.
I'm going to read one more comment before we go to break, then I'm going to give you the break to contemplate it. But Oklahoma says, long version show, I've held the hand of a man screaming for his mama, bleeding out. Yeah, no hope, no real pain relief, and little dignity. Think about that, and we will come back. You're getting the long version of Alex Schadenberg.
Keller Williams affiliate broker Jackie Harker knows a family's most valuable asset, whether buying or selling, is the home. Jackie Harker with Keller Williams Realty in Clarksville, Tennessee would tell you her most important investment is in you. Whether buying or selling a mansion or a starter, the smart money is placed with Harker. Keller Williams' Jackie Harker will work tirelessly to make sure your buying or selling experience will be pleasant and your expectations will be exceeded. Call Keller Williams' Jackie Harker at 931-801-3946 today for all your home buying or selling needs. That's 931-801-3946. And remember, whether buying or selling a mansion or a starter, the smart money is placed with Harker. 931-801-3946. Jackie Harker. Call her today.
WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
Many people simply believe they will never get in trouble with the law or need a lawyer, whether it's the sobering event beginning with blue lights in the rear view and ending with an arrest for DUI, being charged with a crime, or some unfortunate episode has occurred. The law office of Lynn Morton realizes you may not have planned on needing an attorney. Going to court without a professional qualified lawyer will result in disastrous consequences or an outcome in your case that causes havoc in your life for years. You need representation by a lawyer who not only has specialized knowledge, but who truly understands the anxiety, confusion, and devastation faced by someone facing criminal accusations or dealing with an array of other legal problems. Having an experienced, committed advocate like Lynn Morton on your side can make all the difference in your case. With support and guidance, you will have the ability to face your legal situation with confidence that can only come from knowing your case is in capable, dependable hands. Lynn Morton is dedicated to safeguarding her clients' rights and providing them with the attention and consideration their case and future deserve. For these most bitter moments, Lynn Morton can step forward to lend a helping hand and guide you through every aspect. Call Lynn Morton in your most trying time of need. 931-906-0000. A lot of real estate is bought and sold in Clarksville, and all of it has to be inspected, and it has to be done right. It's your largest investment of your life. Do you want to leave its inspection to someone who isn't the best? Of course not. 931-980-5759 gets you the best inspection services. Call Bud Wink at 931-980-5759 to get the home you are buying or selling inspected by the best inspection services. That's 931-980-5759. The best inspection services, changing the quality of home inspections one house at a time.
Since 1941, serving the public interest. WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
I'm not content to be with you in the daytime. Girl, I want to be with you all of the time.
You're getting the long version. Today we have Alex Schadenberg, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition International Chairman. They've got a documentary coming out called The Euthanasia Deception. And one of our listeners, when we went to break, said that she had personally held the hand of a man screaming for his mama and bleeding out. She felt like he had no hope and no real pain relief and little dignity. What's your comment to her?
Obviously, that was a terrible situation. There's no question about it. But the fact of it is why did that occur? I don't know all the medical factors behind it. But what I can say is that seems as an unacceptable situation that just shouldn't have happened. How do I deal with a situation that shouldn't have happened? Do I say now we should legalize assisted suicide or euthanasia? The answer is no. At all. I shouldn't be doing that. But the question is how do I properly deal with these terrible situations? But to give the doctor the right in law to cause my death, that's a whole other question. Obviously, in the past, we had a lot more of that even, because the question remains in my head, how come now is there such a pressure to legalize euthanasia and assisted suicide when there's very few of those cases, and even those cases shouldn't have occurred? But I do hear that, obviously, this has occurred. That's what happened to this person.
Right.
The reality is that shouldn't have happened. But in the past, there was so little we could do, and that was more common.
Well, here's the problem with knee-jerk reactions, and you will find on a case-by-case basis cases where you can make a strong argument that euthanasia would have allowed this person to die with dignity and with a great deal of relief. I mean, there's going to be individual cases like this woman in Oklahoma. There's going to be individual cases where it would appear to be appropriate. But the problem is kind of like the age-old Pandora's box. Once you open that box, what's really going to come out of it? That's really the problem. Is that for instance, every time somebody goes in and shoots, up a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and commits a hate crime, people come out and say, well, we need to outlaw all guns. If guns were illegal and if criminals obeyed the law, then outlawing guns might have prevented that particular shooting. But you can't take one isolated incident and argue that the entire movement is valid because of that one isolated incident. There's a danger in that.
Well, the fact of it is that it's these cases that we hear about where someone is screaming out of their life that is experiencing such a terrible situation, of course, fuels the pro-euthanasia lobby, because it would appear, obviously, that I'm a terrible person. How could I dare be opposed to euthanasia or assisted suicide when somebody else has experienced such pain and suffering?
Yeah.
And it would seem that I'm a heartless person when I hear that, because the fact of it is how would I even dare to deny them this death with dignity? My point remains the same, though. I don't believe in any way that person should have died that way, and that was unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. In fact, there's lots of things we can do. We can even sedate that person so that they're sleeping, that they're not in any way experiencing that. Nonetheless, if I give my doctor the right and law to cause my death, there's an endless myriad of things that will come of it. And don't give me the utopia that this can be controlled, because the fact of it is in the end it can't be controlled. In the end it will become, if death is allowed, if the doctor has the right to cause my death in law, that's okay. The only question remaining in the debate is for what reason.
Right. And the reasons will become broader and broader. If there's one thing that life and history has taught us, is that if it's allowed in one instance, it'll start the instances in which it's allowed. There's always the argument, well, what about this? I mean, I know yeah.
The reason euthanasia has become so prevalent now is we're now far enough away from the Second World War, from other instances that we're saying we've forgotten that human beings can do terrible things. And we think, oh, well, no, we're more mature now in our development as humans. We wouldn't do that. Well, that's not true. Humans have not changed. We're not better now than we used to be. There has been, even in recent history, so many abuses that have occurred, even by doctors. And you have to look at this even further and say, can you actually trust somebody else with your life? And they would say, well, I only want to be avoiding that extreme suffering. Well, if it's all about suffering, then you must also then in the end allow it for psychological reasons too. But I can't determine psychological suffering. It's not possible. There's no parameter that can determine psychological suffering. So in the end, it becomes a personal thing. And in the end, some doctors are going to actually like this. And what do you do? What about that Dr. Shipman in the UK? He, in the end, was convicted of 300 deaths. And so one of the reasons in the UK they still haven't, there's been all this pressure to legalize assisted suicide, and they've constantly rejected it. One of the reasons is you just have to say to them, well, what about Dr. Shipman? And they think, you're right. He just decided that certain people's lives were not worth living, and he went in there and ended those lives.
Yeah. Well,
can you control that? Can you protect people from that? No.
No.
You can't. But if you make it legal, when suddenly now his act is legal, and he's the only witness, and then you're going to say, oh, he's going to be sending in these reports, and he's going to be keeping everything above board? No. And he thought everything he was doing was compassionate, too.
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of... once they have the authority to do it in the first place, it really turns into a game of, well, what about this? We've seen that over and over again, and it's the very reason why the Second Amendment centers and pro-gun advocates are all over the country in the United States saying that you can't ban assault rifles, not because we think that American citizens necessarily need assault rifles for hunting or protection, but because we don't think you'll stop with assault rifles.
Right.
It's the exact same argument, and that argument has been warding off any type of gun control law in many states in the United States for years and years, is that we don't think you'll stop at assault rifles. And the reason why legalizing euthanasia is so dangerous is because it won't stop. It'll eventually reach things other than people that are in extraordinary pain that is incapable of being presently or in the future managed. It'll expand to it'll expand into psychological conditions where their pain is more internal and psychological.
And absolutely, that is a natural outcome. It's not about, we're scaremongering. No, it is actually a natural outcome that's what would happen, and it just sort of makes sense. If you're going to allow it, well, why wouldn't you allow that? It would be inconceivable not to allow that, and that's just the reality.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us today, Alex. Thank you so much for joining the long version.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. That was Alex Schadenberg with the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. And we really appreciate him joining us from all the way from Ontario. So, well, John, what are your thoughts as we sum up today?
Mixed.
Yeah, because you have personally experienced people that are in inordinate pain that
yes.
they can't manage.
And it's dragged on for a couple of months. It's not a quick end. Well, that's where I have mixed emotions about it.
My thoughts are, I can certainly see instances where euthanasia would be much kinder in certain type of illnesses with certain levels of pain than having to live through that excruciating pain. I can certainly tell you that there, but I'm also someone that is wary of legalizing things that give our government even more power over us. And if we're going to be if we're going to be a nation with socialized medicine, medicine's going to become an agency of the government, just like it is in Canada.
Yeah.
And I'm a little wary
of the death squad will once again rear its ugly head. Well, as your thoughts, since you're a Catholic, what are your religious thoughts about this?
I'm glad you brought that up, and Meeks Attorneys appreciates that too.
Thank you.
My theological moment is this. I think we get in a lot of trouble, and as a Catholic, I think we get in a lot of trouble when we start playing God.
Yeah.
And I think that there's certain things that I don't know.
Even personally?
A Catholic would, yes. I think a Catholic looks at it and says, all right, I've been afflicted with this, and this is a painful, malingering death, but, maybe my suffering will lessen someone else. There's always that the belief that maybe there's some reason that we're supposed to be experiencing this, that if we check out, it's a mortal sin in Catholicism to commit suicide.
I know. That's why
it's a mortal sin. Yeah. So you're never going to see a Catholic that's going to think, we generally prize life.
Yeah.
We're against abortion. We're against capital punishment. And I guarantee you the Catholic Church will take a stance against euthanasia if they haven't already. I'm sure they have already. But so there's a part of me as a religious man, theologically, that says, okay, this
is bad.
Whatever's happening to these people, there is an ultimate reality that has.
I mean, you're gonna die either way.
We're all afflicted with an affliction that we cannot avoid. Death and taxes.
They both come.
Right. So we're all dying. We're all dying. I'm dying. You're dying. We're dying. Yeah. We're all dying.
And as we get older, it gets a little closer.
I am of the opinion that you should go out whenever you're supposed to go out, which also means that I'm not really for keeping people on respiration in the hospital where they would otherwise be dead.
I do not want that.
No, I don't think that's appropriate. I think when it's time for me to check out, I'm going to check out. Yeah. And I think I would rather that be God's time than mine. I don't think that I am equipped to make that call. And I don't think that doctors are equipped to make that call either. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that's my call to make.
But somebody does. Now, your family may say, well, we need to keep him alive.
Well, I know. I don't think
see what I'm saying?
I don't think that's their call either. You know, we need to keep him alive.
Well, you know, we don't want him to leave yet, even though you're on a
but that's still
ventilator or respirator or whatever.
But isn't that playing God?
You know, and you're just laying there breathing.
But aren't they
by a machine?
I think we get in trouble when we play God.
Yeah.
I think that when we supplant what should happen to us by way of the natural order with our way, that we're kind of, for today's theological moment, committing the original sin of trying to be godlike.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem. So euthanasia is apparently, again, much like pedophilia, it's a much more rampant problem than you realize.
Yeah, it's out there.
It is out there. And what I see in euthanasia, and I'll tell this to Oklahoma too, what I see with euthanasia on down the road, when you're looking through your future scope, what I see is a situation where basically just insurance companies are going to tell doctors, we'll give you a bonus if you get him to kill himself because we don't want to have to pay for this treatment.
And we'll call the herd.
Yeah, I see that. Because I know an insurance company would do that in a New York minute, and that's what terrifies me. If you legalize it, you're going to get the, hey, listen, we've crunched the numbers.
Yeah, this guy's going to cost us about $1 million for 6 months.
We've crunched the numbers. And, we'll give you a $1,000 bonus if you can talk this dude into just taking the injection.
Yeah, going out a little early.
Yeah, there is no amount of evil of which I think our government incapable of committing.
No, I can see that.
I apologize, but I know them very well, and there is nothing nefarious they will not do in my estimation.
And that's where it comes to on a personal level too. I think it should be someone's choice if they want to do that. I am conflicted on it.
You are, and it's hard to say. How do you know? It's like the person, the Reitzman person in the documentary said that the question she was asked was, "Do you want me to keep him comfortable, or do you want me to relieve his pain?" She didn't understand that she was being asked, "Do you want me to go on and down him?"
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? She didn't quite get the question.
Yeah.
And so, as far as it being an individual's choice, even that is problematic, because how do you know that they're exercising their choice?
Yeah. I mean, if I know something's coming and I know what the chances are for the suffering that I may take before I get to the point of death, I would opt for it.
Well, the Catholic in me would say, no, that's God's choice. and you don't really have a choice. Yeah.
Personal view.
I don't know about you presbys. I'm not sure how real religious you guys are, because Trump's one of you, but
we're a little bit.
I'm kidding. Anyway,
Catholic light.
We want to thank Alex Schadenberg for joining us today. It certainly was noteworthy that somebody from Ontario, Canada, would come on with us.
Yes.
You can go to alexschadenberg.blogspot.com, or you can look up Euthanasia Prevention Coalition if you would like to comment further. Check them out. For John Michaels and Fletcher Long, and until tomorrow, we're out.
There is a name in the Clarksville community we have come to associate with excellence in legal services. That name is Kimberly Turner and Associates, the attorneys who care. There are times in life when reliance on attorneys who care is particularly critical. Family strife is definitely among those times, whether it be divorce, child custody, juvenile delinquent petitions, alimony or child support increases, or any type of strife which invades our personal lives. Kim Turner and Associates are the attorneys who care. Call Kim today at 572-1134 or get an appointment. Perhaps you just stop by her place located at 130 Franklin Street next to the Black Horse. That's 572-1134. Kimberly Turner and Associates are the attorneys who care.
Imagine if I told you that an earthquake was going to hit tomorrow right where you live. That it would be 6.5 in magnitude with aftershocks occurring twice 25 minutes apart. You'd no doubt talk with your loved ones, and you'd make a plan today. It's true, I can't tell you an earthquake will happen tomorrow, but what if it does? Shouldn't you have a plan? Go to ready.gov/communicate and make your emergency plan today. Don't wait. Communicate. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
WJZM Radio, Clarksville, Tennessee.
A home is one of the biggest investments you can make. One of the best ways to start your house hunting is to contact a home loan pro you can trust. The 2015 Reader's Choice favorite banker, Matt McWhirter,